Well, folks, welcome to the ProTech Talk, sponsored by the ProTechnics division of Core Laboratories. I believe this is our 8th or 9th ProTech Talk. Does that sound about right, Dick?
Yeah, I think that's close, yeah.
So we're pleased to have all of you who are attending. We're especially pleased to have a very interesting and informative expert panel that has joined us here. We appreciate them taking the time from their busy schedules to be a part of this. And we're just looking forward to this being a very learning experience for all of us. And hopefully we can have a little fun along the way as well. So welcome, panelists, attendees. Let me introduce the panelists to begin with. We have two Daves here. So I'll start with Dave Cannon. Dave Cannon has over 13 years of industry experience working in multiple conventional plays throughout the U.S. After obtaining his MS in Geoscience, I won't mention his university because we have a little contest that we play in these ProTech Talks. And that is associate the panelist with the university. So I'm going to give you some hints, but you're going to have to decide which person fits which university. But Dave Cannon received his MS in Geoscience. He then moved to Midland and worked the Rockies unconventional assets with ConocoPhillips. His breadth of experience included plays in Wyoming, Utah, North Dakota, and Montana. Then Dave moved to Tulsa with Samson Resources and eventually Newfield, working the Rockies and Mid-Continent unconventional plays. In early 2014, Dave moved back to Midland, where he is dedicated exclusively to leading Permian Basin unconventional exploration, assessment, and development for Diamondback Energy. Welcome, Dave. Thank you for joining us. Dave Leopold has over 30 years of oil and gas industry experience, with 23 of those years in Fort Worth. He is currently president and CEO of Total E&P Barnett, which is an affiliate of Total SA. Prior to this, he served as Chief Operating Officer for Atlas Energy, Operations Manager for Chesapeake Energy, and he has held various management positions with Anadarko Petroleum and Union Pacific Resources. Just out of curiosity, did you and Dick know each other at UPR? Okay, I had a feeling you did. Leopold began his career in the industry with Plains Petroleum in Denver, and he holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Petroleum Engineering. He also serves on a number of industry boards. So welcome, Dave. Thank you for joining us. Next up is Dennis Degner. Dennis is the Chief Operating Officer for Range Resources and Senior Vice President. In his current position, Degner is responsible for all of Range's operations, including drilling, production, safety, gas marketing, new technology and development, and he's primarily focused on their acreage position in Appalachia. His experience includes more than 24 years in the oil and gas industry. Before joining Range Resources, Dennis held a variety of technical and managerial positions with Encana, Sierra Engineering, and Halliburton, and worked in basins across the U.S. Dennis holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Agricultural Engineering. And finally, Dick Leonard is the Director of Engineering Diagnostics at ProTechnics, which is a division of Core Lab. He joined the company after working for 19 years with Union Pacific Resources in several engineering and supervisory positions. At UPR, most of his engineering experience dealt with stimulation of tight sands in East Texas and South Texas, and horizontal development in North Louisiana. During the last 20 years, most of Dick's focus has been on diagnostic analysis of various unconventional plays throughout North America. Dick graduated with a BS degree in petroleum engineering. Okay, here's the four universities that you're going to have to kind of associate the individuals with. One of these individuals attended a university whose mascot is a mysterious feline that dwelt in a cave overlooking the university. It was supposed to strike fear in the hearts of athletic opponents. All right, enough said about that one. Next up is this individual's alma mater is often referred to as Coors U. Okay, I'll leave that up to you as to who to associate that with. Next up, this individual's alma mater. I refer back to the classical Greek era, where Greek philosophers, poets, and other intellectuals liked to meet on what was known as Mars Hill to debate the issues of the day. Academicians from this individual's alma mater are known together for such discussions at an institution known as the Dixie Chicken. And finally, the last individual, his alma mater would characterize him as a T-SIP. Okay, that's it. Enough of the foolishness. You guys are giving it away by smiling at the wrong times here. Thanks a lot. My name is Buddy Woodroof. I'm the technical manager for ProTechnics, and I'm excited to be the moderator for this ProTech talk on the energy transition. What does the future hold? So without further ado and foolishness, we're going to jump into some of the questions for the panel. And please feel free, if you have questions you'd like to ask for the panelists, please add them to our chat line. And from time to time, we will interrupt the discussions for a poll that all of the participants, the panelists, and the attendees, we'd like to invite you to participate in that poll, and we'll report the results as we go. Question number one, panelists. What do you see as the political landscape of the oil and gas industry for 2021? So who would like to go first? Raise your hand. You can nod at me.
I'll go ahead and attack that.
All right,
one
Mr.
first.
Cannon.
Yeah, I think in a single word, challenging. However, in my opinion, and I think others here as well, we must rise above those partisan politics and kind of come together to create solutions. Nothing's ever accomplished if we approach our political and policy divide as a win-lose mentality. We believe that everyone kind of has a frame of reference that informs their system of belief. We have to respect that and acknowledge where our own frame of reference might have blind spots. Instead of seeking understanding on why our differences in energy outlook exist, we tend to revert to more visceral reactions. And I think the reason for that is the fact that for our industry, we feel that our livelihood is at stake. We have all invested time and effort towards building a viable and needed industry, and also our own personal careers that provides for our individuals and our families. We view others who question our industry as someone who really wants to take it away. I think we have to stop doing that and instead find kind of more common middle ground that our industry and other alternative energy industries can achieve going forward. We have a powerful group of technological experts within our industry that can be leveraged for that transition into the future. And it doesn't have to be so binary either. We can marry some of these energy sources together, through the power of our thought, through the power of our innovation. We shouldn't shy away from that challenge, honestly. So that's kind of how we kind of think about it going forward. There's a seat at the table for everyone involved.
Great advice. Who's up next? Who would like to add to that narrative?
Yeah, Buddy, I'll jump in.
Okay, Dennis.
I think from our lens, we've seen success over the past, I'll speak to Appalachia for a second, but we've seen success operating in Appalachia, in excess of the past 10 years. And that's in the presence of both a Republican and a Democratic, configuration. There's a lot of autonomy that's given and expected at the local level. And so for us, it starts with, how do you operate responsibly? How do you become engaged in the community? How do you listen and understand how you need to not only meet the regulations that are, set forth, but in some cases, how do you exceed so that you become a good community partner? Saying you're going to be a good community partner is one thing, but to be an active player in doing so is another. And so, I think as we look at it, we've seen, different parties in the Oval Office over the balance of that 10-year discussion I just presented. And even in those cases, we've certainly been successful growing an asset when we needed to grow, maintaining a production base when we needed to do so. And then all the while, you've got an ESG now discussion that's ever growing and evolving at the same time. And I suspect that's going to play a significant role in how we all operate going forward, whether you're in a oil basin, gas basin, whether you're in the north or whether you're in the Rockies or the south. I don't think it will matter. That will all play a role in everyone's ability to operate. So knowing that, I think you're going to see that play a huge role in the political discussion going forward. And I like Dave's comment. We're all going to have to work together and rise above and have a conversation around what an energy policy looks like that really allows our clean burning fuel sources to continue to fuel the world. We still have people that 2.5 billion people who are basically still living with biomass fuel sources. And when you just look at what we can provide and have been able to provide as an industry, you got to think that there's a place for us, especially as it pertains to how we operate and how it aligns with the governmental approach.
Dennis, since you were the first to bring up this acronym ESG, you might explain what that stands for some of those who may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, good question, buddy. ESG stands for environmental and social governance. It's a way of really taking a big bow and putting around the discussion of a lot of topics, really. And for us, it's around emissions. When you think about the E component and water recycling, looking at how you're improving your environmental performance on a location in your operations. The other part really dives into governance of your organization, things like diversity, inclusion, et cetera. But for sake of purposes today, the big E is starting to rise above some of those other topics, and it's really an environmental push on how we can further reduce our emissions, reduce our footprint, and continue to be a leader in that space from an environmental performance.
All right. Anything else from the other two, or shall we jump to the next question?
Buddy, or Dave, you can go if you comment.
I was just going to say that, it's been a huge political whirlwind for us here. Everybody knows that. And I think we're going to see a big push from Biden in his first 100 days of office, especially on the executive action front. And so we've already seen that, the Keystone Pipeline looks like it shut down, and we're reentering the Paris Accord. And I think the pipeline industry is going to really have a tough, treacherous environment ahead. But, at the end of the day, we all want that methane going into the pipeline and not the atmosphere. And so I agree with everyone that it's going to be, a different push for us. But as long as we work together, I think we can all make it work together in our industry as well as on the political side.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think all three of those are excellent comments, and I 100% agree with it. I think being the most senior member of this panel, I will tell you, I've been in this business for over 40 years, so we've seen a lot of different political environments. I'm not going to say this isn't a tougher one than maybe we've had in some, but there's been some really tough ones, and we've always found a way to survive and flourish. And so my expectations are really pretty high for us to just continue to push the efficiencies. Obviously, the ESG is a big issue, as Dennis said, and I think we will embrace it and come up with some excellent solutions, because as Dave Cannon mentioned, we've got the technological expertise. So it's just, I think I'm excited about the future.
One other thing to add is, we're going to need really both sides to come together, because I know that we've heard that Amazon Web Services are threatening to stop providing services to oil and gas companies. And so And I know at least overseas, there's some banks that won't provide loans to companies in our industry. And so, we kind of have to get away from that side as well to work together. So hopefully we don't have to deal with some of the things that might be coming. But if we can get both sides looking at the positive front, I think we can work together.
I thought that was an interesting comment by Vicky Hollab with Oxy here this past week about how they put more CO2 in the ground than Tesla is saving us. So good point there, I think. Derek, we ready for the first poll question?
Sounds good. Let's
coming your way. 1 second.
All right, here we go, folks. Again, this is for everybody.
All right, it should be, there we go.
There we go. All right, vote away. What do you think will be the most important driver in the oil and gas industry as we move forward? So pick one. Okay, I voted. All right, we're going to discuss the results at what point in time? Refresh my memory, Derek.
We'll give everyone a few minutes to actually make sure they see it and can vote. If you guys want to go on and.
Okay, we'll proceed and then you
Maybe you guys
let us know when you're ready to discuss those results. Okay.
Whatever you want to do. If you guys want to weigh in with your 2 cents, and then we can pull up the audience results, or if you want to move on, we can circle back to it, whatever works for you guys.
All right, well, let's jump to that question, gentlemen. What do you see as the key drivers in this energy transition period we're in? Is it commodity prices, supply demand, ESG, geology, reservoir issues, operational efficiencies, infrastructure? What do you think are the key drivers there?
all of the above.
Okay.
I mean, they're tied. I guess I
want to pick out some specifics.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that, obviously commodity prices drive so much of this, but it's a function of supply and demand. It's going to be a function of the ESG requirements. So I think they're all really, really linked. I think activity historically has been driven by the commodity price. When we're in low commodity prices, we shut down. When we're in higher prices, I think some of the things that might affect our ability to drill and explore in certain areas will probably just shift activity into other areas. And also as prices go up, activity will follow. So that'd be my 2 cents.
Okay, anybody else?
For us at Diamondback, we tend to try to work towards things that we can control versus things that we can't control. Obviously, go ahead and try to predict the price of oil tomorrow, much less 10 years from now. Supply and demand also is something that's hard to predict accurately. There's lots of economic models out there that we can draw from to plan our business, and ESG even in some degree can potentially have some uncertainty. We have commitments toward it. We have commitments to baselines toward it, but how does that evolve into the future as new problems might crop up? We don't know. So one of the things that we take to heart that we can control is essentially the issues around where our extraction takes place, which is the reservoir. And we understand that the unconventional industry in a modern sense is still extremely young. The true recovery that we have today is predicted, but is that physically possible? A lot of these wells are less than 5 years old, and we're making assumptions on their production for 30, 40, 50 years. Is that something that's actually physically possible within the reservoir? Or as we move more toward full development of these unconventionals, how do the problems of interaction and interference take hold? I think there's a mountain of work still to do on understanding what our reservoirs are and how our impact upon them can ultimately change their ability to deliver the hydrocarbons that we produce on a daily basis. And of course, the infrastructure, I was told at a very early age in my career that if you produce something, someone will find a way to carry it to market. So all you essentially need is money at that point. If it's economically viable, it'll get done.
From my standpoint, I chose ESG. The importance of our industry's need to focus on ESG can't be overstated, and it's only getting amplified. We as an industry must embrace it or get passed by. And if I were to look at my calendar over the past 6 months, or maybe to a year, the discussions right now on ESG are way more than what I ever saw before. So, I've got probably 3 points that I'd mention on this. Everyone has a different definition on what ESG is, not on just the letters, but whether it's major independence, the majors approach. I'll say that, my parent company dropped out of API because of some things regarding ESG, which is a pretty big thing. We must be involved in making our message known on the value of energy, and that we're a key stakeholder in our collective improvement. And I work for Total, where our slogan is committed to a better energy. And on the environmental side, our emissions are a key factor that we look for, especially on the investment side. So secondly, it's the right thing to do. No industry is perfect. Again, on the environmental side of things, we have to make sure we're doing the right things, in particular on methane and CO2 emissions. I'm involved with Texoga right now, Texas Oil and Gas Association. And, I'm excited about how Texas is trying to lead the way on the air front. Things are changing. And then thirdly, on the financial institutions, they care about it. The investors care about it. Capital's a fundamental part of everything that we do. And I think we need to better standardization of some of the goals, but this industry has to continue to fight for capital to survive. And I don't have to elaborate on the fact of where we sit in terms of market cap, returns, and all that relative to the tech market since 2008. Beyond tech, oil and gas has lots of competitions for capital. And so the social side is only going to get tougher, in my opinion. And we must do a better job of making the positive benefits of oil and gas heard while we embrace this change.
All right. Derek, we ready to report the poll results?
Yep, 1 second. Let me just get them.
Okay, let's see how the audience as a whole voted on this topic.
1 second. It's giving me an error message. Hold on. Sorry.
Okay.
Here we go. Here we go. Coming your way.
All right. Supply and demand. Not much of a contest there. Commodity prices moderately close. All right. Thanks, everyone. Here's our first poll results. Next question. What sorts of energy transition strategies do you envision being employed? Assuming a corporation has decided we're going to go more to gas production, we're going to go more to renewables. How do you see these strategies evolving to make those transitions?
Buddy, I'll jump in, I guess, on this one.
Okay.
I think we're going to have to continue to be creative and think outside the box on areas like electric frac fleets, as an example. That was something I don't think really a lot of folks probably saw gaining the traction that it did maybe a few years ago. And now look at the interest in the inquiries and utilization of that particular equipment. So we utilize a fleet. We've been real pleased with the results. I would tell you, we explored that kind of technology for a host of reasons, one of which being the improvement in emissions and noise on location, to kind of maybe more further align with some of the comments that Dave Leopold shared. So we're going to have to continue to think outside the box. And in some cases, it may require us strategically thinking about partnerships with our service providers differently in order to have that kind of capital investment. So we're gonna have to partner, I think, in some creative ways to bring those kind of creative solutions to the table. And then I think the other thing that comes to mind is when we think about emissions on a site and as a part of this transition, there's still a lot of emissions calculations that are purely algorithm based. And we're going to need to take a leadership position in how we further measure what those look like, have a seat at the table with other industry supporters, and in some cases, maybe those who are trying to challenge us as an industry on what those look like, and try and determine what is the best estimate we can have as we look to further improve upon what comes off of a producing site or a compressor site or a processing plant. I think we're going to have to continue to really advance those processes, and I would assume that the algorithms we use today are going to further improve and get refined in the years ahead.
Anybody else have some strategies in mind here for making this transition?
I think, to echo some of Dennis's thoughts about this particular topic, I think at this point in time, most operators are employing at least test phases for some of these new technological applications to reduce emissions, to at least reduce the footprint that we have at the operating site. And then maybe if we have midstream components at that site as well, less turnarounds at compression plants, so we don't have to flare, or other ways of being able to route product that allow us to reduce that greenhouse gas emission. But I think on a more global scale, in terms of our whole industry and the movement from maybe even a more liquids-based market to a more gas-based market, we need to create sustained demand. One of the cruxes of kind of the natural gas market as it stands today within the U.S., or kind of our domestic supply and demand, is the fact that it's very seasonal and it's very regional. So you see that reflected within the Henry Hub pricing, on a yearly basis. If we can raise that lower point of the inflection curve to a more sustainable and stable higher price for natural gas, I think you'll start to see that transition of equal opportunity between liquids extraction and gas extraction. When gas prices were essentially in the dumpster a couple of years ago, it was a nuisance, right? And we were trying to find ways to get rid of it. And if we can create a sustainable profit stream from that as well, through changes within the demand side, I think that is where we can provide a cleaner source of energy that's still fossil fuel based. I think the most successful technological advancement that we've seen, that we've been able to actually decrease our our gas emissions essentially on a national scale, has been the conversion of coal-fired electricity plants to natural gas. I think we need to continue to push that. That's just the evolutional progress of our energy creation. To remain stuck in the past, I think, is something that holds us back. With all due respect to the coal industry, it's the pentultimate of biomass, right? We need to move past that and create a sustainable market that's a cleaner energy source for the entire country and eventually the entire world. And what should dovetail with that is vocational education and transitional programs for the coal industry to move into natural gas industry, so it has the least amount of impact economically in those areas that would be impacted by that transition.
What about the injection of CO2 for EOR purposes? You see more of that occurring? you know, as kind of a best of both worlds? Okay, I guess not.
Was that directed at me? Yeah, I mean, obviously, with ourselves, with the lens of Diamondback, you know, we have limited opportunities to utilize CO2 for EOR, but we're following the trend. We're constantly assessing the economic viability of doing so. The problem with EOR is you need this a certain type of reservoir in order for it to work. The Permian kind of has something that we call a containment problem. Lots of the basin's been pincushioned with wells. The horizontals themselves have been hydraulically stimulated to create large surface area. So there's a high potential for a lot of the CO2 to inject for EOR purposes that essentially have a loss of containment. So the benefit or the incremental increase in liquids production can be minimal. So there's a lot of challenges, I think, that we have to overcome in order for CO2 to be a viable EOR choice for the Permian Basin in general. I know tests are underway with certain operators here in the Permian and in other basins across the lower 48 in North America. But I think we're still in the early phases of that. I'd say kind of the second inning, if you will, of CO2 EOR and unconventionals.
Hey, buddy, I would dovetail just a little bit on what Dave said there. I think just in general, looking for ways, and I think you bring up a really good point on terms of the demand on gas. You know, if you just look at West Texas and just look at what's happened in the last year and a half with regards to flare gas. You know, we used to, some of the amounts of flare gas we had out there were, you know, unbelievable. And then at the same time, you've got Dennis up in the Northeast who would die for some of those volumes of gas. And so I think looking for ways to create markets, other uses, re-injecting gas, all of those types of things, I think are going to be, they're very much in line with exactly what Dave Leopold mentioned in terms of the, you know, the environmental part of this is we're going to look for ways, we've got to make money, but also at the same time that meet some of our obligations to outside of our industry.
Yeah, buddy. Also, I'll say, you know, from a Total point of view, we're using our profits from oil and gas to invest in solar, offshore wind, electrification, hydrogen fuel technology, you know, pretty much across the globe. And certainly LNG and gas is going to be an important bridge fuel along, you know, long term to get where we want to go. But I see the majors really using their balance sheet to strengthen and develop these projects potentially with some unique financing and ownership structures. You know, the regulatory type returns typically don't compete favorably with our oil and gas projects. So it's a balance, you know, meaning it's not going to happen overnight, but we have to be looking at that. And, you know, from a major versus an independent point of view, especially when the major I'm talking about here is centered in Europe, you know, we're a little bit further along down that path of the renewables than a lot of folks. So it's been pretty interesting. Here at TEP Barnett in Fort Worth, you know, we've put in some solar at our field facilities to run that, and we're currently looking at more solar that we can run out in the field locations to offset all of our draws everywhere else. So it's kind of interesting.
Hey, buddy, before we go on, we had a question from the audience is kind of in line with this. And the question was, how about CO2 injection for carbon capture purposes alone? Anyone got any comment on that at all?
Yeah, I think that's straight CO2 sequestration, right? And it's on a more permanent basis. I think we have littered across the lower 48 is a large amount of heavily depleted oil and gas fields that could essentially be targets for CO2 sequestration. As long as the seal integrity is good, as long as there isn't any other potential complicating factors that would result in a breach of that gas to the surface, or at least to maybe producible horizons, that would then become kind of a nuisance gas, and essentially ruin the point of that particular sequestration. But I think moving into that realm and providing some of these spots for that sequestration to begin, I think is something that falls squarely within our industry's wheelhouse.
Well said. Okay, we've talked about,
Buddy, one more. Sorry, I hate to interrupt, but let's do another poll question here.
okay,
I
shoot it there,
Derek's
Derek.
got one ready.
Sorry, it's coming. There we go.
There we go. Which of the following do you see changing or advancing the most in the upcoming years? Proppants, fluids, diagnostics, hardware, disposal. I think we know how all ProTechnics employees should vote on this one. Okay, while you're voting on those, again, be thinking about the academic institutions these individuals came from. So if you're getting any hints, go to the chat line and cast your votes for Cannon, Leopold, Leonard, and Degner, and which institution of higher learning they're associated with. Okay, we've talked about these energy transition strategies. Let's talk about supply and demand, price points. Let's be realistic. At what price points might we see more transitions from liquid-rich assets to gas-rich assets, or vice versa? How are the price points going to play into this energy transition process? And throw out some numbers, so we can go to school on what numbers it's going to take for oil prices, gas prices, et cetera. Who wants to be the first prognosticator here? All right, Dave, Leopold, you smile first.
Well, I'm thinking in a 350 plus gas price environment, the balance sheet and the cash flows of gas heavy operators look a lot better. For oil, probably the $50, $60 barrel is the short-term norm, maybe. I think the futures in oil and gas are pretty good for the next couple of years. And I think, just with, generally when Democrats are in the office, prices go up. And so, those numbers I'm giving you, I'm hoping are short-term, and the oil price maybe go up higher than that. But, here in the Barnett, boy, 350 would be awesome, but I'll take $3.
There you go. All right, Dave, how about the other Dave? How about on the oil side in West Texas?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Depends on who you talk to. Honestly, it depends on your operating costs. A lot of people out here are very successful at $50 a barrel. And we can sustain a multi-decade business model if it remained flat. I mean, we run multiple price decks, obviously a strip model, but then we also run a flat model and look at our returns on investment if we have $50 oil in perpetuity. And we have very successful projects even at that investment level. And obviously the service costs, a lot of the costs associated with the extraction, they're going to modulate to what that price point is. if price of oil gets down to 20 or below again, hopefully not, obviously that creates a pinch point within our industry. But I think anything above that, as long as you're situated within the right basin with the right resource availability, I think even low oil prices can still be very economically viable for a lot of companies. So, and in fact, to be honest, this is my opinion, probably not the opinion of other people in my executive team, but $100 oil is a little daunting sometimes because what it does is it hides mistakes. And, you tend to make poor decisions when your commodity price is really high. And, the lower prices focus you to what's really important, which is return on investment.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, as you look, at Washington County for Southwest PA, on the east side of Washington County, we've got 1,000 BTU gas, and basically we'll call it, for the most part, pipeline quality gas. When you get to the western side of Washington County, you're talking about 1,350 BTU kind of levels, and maybe some of our stronger condensate performers. So we've got the balance just over the course of a single county. I don't think in our case you're going to see us have any wild swings in what our capital allocation looks like, because I think Dave Cannon mentioned this earlier. Try and predict where prices are headed, and I think you're just as apt to be as right as you could be wrong. And so something we talk about internally from a planning perspective is, let's don't overcorrect the steering of the car. Let's have a good approach. Our assets are, whether you're on the east side or west side, when you factor in the NGL contribution, and gosh, look where propane prices are today, and it's certainly encouraging when you see what's going on in the market there. But our economics compete pretty well across the board. So as we think about prices, would $3.50 be great? You bet. I think we can look at making money at those levels and start to continue to have a balance sheet health that aligns with the quality of our asset. But we're going to look at capital allocation that delivers the value to our shareholders, where we're going to drill where we can keep infrastructure full and utilized. We're going to drill where we have our best wells, where we can put our longest and most capital efficient wells in the ground. So I think a lot's going to kind of play into this, and in addition to just what the commodity price will look like. Because if we can keep our cost structure and our GP&T low, we know that also goes a long way in us having a good economic discussion at the end of the year that translates into value to our shareholders.
And I think that one of the biggest struggles our industry has faced for forever is the wild swings in prices. If we could get a consistent price that people could count on, and the reality is we're probably always going to have these swings, but that always has been the challenge. Is we get $100 oil and we go crazy, and I agree 100% with that Dave said. It hides a lot of mistakes, and then it drops to 30 in 6 months. Well, that just sends shockwaves through the industry. So I thought those were really good answers you guys had on that. Let's go ahead and show the poll results for that last question, and then you can give us the next question, buddy.
Okay. See how the audience felt. Son of a gun. That is the correct answer. All right.
You gotta like that. You
We got some enlightened attendees here. That's great to hear.
And for all of those that were not in that 59%, shame on you.
That's right. Not even close.
You
All
mean
right.
you got a lot of employees in attendance?
No
We'll move
comment.
on to the next question here. We'll deal with that later. All right, next question. What technological needs might these transitions bring to light? What technological needs? We've already talked about electrical frac fleets, for instance. What do you see as some of the technological needs that these apparent transitions are going to require us to address? All right.
Well, I think, buddy, we're going to.
All right, Dennis, go for it.
I think we're going to need to see momentum around further electrification of what's operating equipment looks like on site. If you look at the way our footprint is set up, we've got a big loop gathering system with our midstream partner in our wet gas assets. When you look at the dry gas side, it makes a lot of sense to be able to pull gas right out of the system and utilize it as a clean burning fuel source for our operations. So, I think you're going to see further momentum, if you will, around whether it's dual fuel rigs. That's not new technology, but certainly has seen its peaks and valleys in interest and utilization based upon cost and, let's just say, the commitment to associated with that fuel conversion. And then if you release a rig, that kit can then go with that rig. So I think having some commitment around that and further advancement is going to be helpful. And then I'm going to go back to the ESG topic. I think we're going to have to, as a part of this, you're going to see some transition strategies around further measurements of, what does emissions look like on a pad site, whether it's air studies or whether it's looking at instrumentation that further advances to understand what that looks like. You're hearing conversations now around validation processes that could start to evolve that validate what your emissions reporting numbers look like. Are they better than that? Are they in line with what the reports are? We already touched on maybe some of the downfalls with using a purely algorithm-based approach. So I think those are going to be a couple of key areas as we think about transitioning in the future.
All right. What other technological needs can you foresee here?
From the
There's a lot of talk about monitoring systems, these remote monitoring systems, these algorithmic control process. What do you think about
buddy,
those?
I'll tell you, buddy, from the major point of view in Total, electricity storage is really going to be a main thing. And battery technologies, have really not drastically changed in the past few years. And the need for efficient electricity storage is still a challenge that we need to tackle. And batteries require a lot of minerals and mining, much of which is controlled by China. I co-chair the TCU MBA Energy Board, and our newest board member leads Black Mountain International. They're mining minerals for batteries in Australia. And as electric generation starts to rely more on cyclical sources, meaning wind and solar, we're certainly going to need to figure out the storage and transmission challenges there. And so, it's real interesting because I've also seen a couple of my LinkedIn friends have gone from the oil and gas industry into the solar and wind industry. And so that's probably going to happen maybe on a larger scale coming up. But also just, again, it's interesting because, the answers that I typically would be coming up with would join Dennis and Dave, but now being part of a major based in Europe, I'm really brought in on a couple things that are a little bit different than what we would expect. So anyway, that's all I wanted to tell you.
So I think that to add on to it, I don't think this is something we've brought up yet. We've been talking about kind of the energy transition, what our role in that is. But I think one of the things that technological advancements that we need to cover right now is, at least in the Permian, is disposal of water. That's near and dear to every operator, especially in the Delaware Basin, to their hearts. And one of the biggest issues we start to see that creeps into the ESG is the role of induced seismicity from saltwater disposal. And as regulations become more strict, as limits on injection begin to flow through the regulatory bodies to the operators, we're going to have to start thinking about alternatives, because the water is coming regardless. That's one of the things that our industry's really been banging our head on, especially in the Delaware versus the Midland, is the best spots for oil production, be it the Wolfcamp A, come with an appreciable amount of water. And in some cases, good wells are 3-to-1 water oil ratio. And that means we need not only a system of disposal, but probably new technological advancements to dispose of that water and other means to combat induced seismicity. And, you know, we're talking about physical filtration, RO filtration, evaporative ponds, you know, desalinization plants, you know, things of that nature that can get the water to some sort of quality that could either be discharged at the surface following EPA and Texas environmental regulations, or utilized as a profit center, you know, sell it to agriculture, you know, make Midland green again. You know, those are some of the things that I think we need to think about as an industry and bring those technological advancements to the fore instead of just completely relying upon our lobbying efforts to continue the injection of wastewater into the subsurface formations.
Well, since golf courses use more water than the oil industry does, maybe if we can desalinize the water somewhat, we can sell it to the golf courses here. So.
We don't have that many in Midland, so we need to branch out.
All right, great points. What, if any, effects will these transitions have on your completion strategies? Okay, think about what these transitions are going to involve. Maybe it's oil to gas, maybe it's just better CO2 control. How are they going to affect your completion strategies, if any? Your design, your well spacing, your landing zones, any of those completion issues going to be severely impacted by these energy transitions that we're talking about?
Buddy, I think for us, a topic we touched on earlier was really around efficiency. And so, you know, maybe, I don't know how well this ties into the transition discussion, but I think we're going to have to continue to look for ways to be as efficient as possible. And so if that's, you know, finding a way when you have a pad site that has, you know, 300 or 400 frac stages to be executed, you know, if there's 15 minutes between a stage, how can you make it 10? And that 5 minutes over the balance of 300 stages, and you do it pad to pad, all of a sudden starts to add into, you know, several days of additional production. So again, making it efficient on how we're delivering those molecules to the market and the end user. I think that's going to continue to play a key role. We focused a lot on the drilling side over the last few years, and how do we drill faster in the lateral? How do we get better ROP? How do we shift from, you know, gosh, 10 years ago when I joined Range, an average lateral was 3,000 feet. And today it's in excess of 10,000 feet. We've got several that we drilled our 3 longest laterals this past year in the third quarter, and they were all 19,000 feet horizontals. So, you know, that's continuing to evolve, but we're going to have to continue to become more efficient on the completion side as well, both operationally and also how we, you know, continue to extract our molecules. There's a lot of parent-child discussions these days, I think, in various basins. We've been pretty fortunate on our side to not be plagued with some of those same challenges. We've drilled infill wells, and we've been fortunate enough to see either as good, in a lot of cases, we've seen some better well performance by the time you put a modern completion and a modern landing target on it. But, you know, as we think about, you know, completion changes in the future, parent-child relationship could play a big part in this for some basins. And back to the, you know, I selected diagnostic on the prior slide as our poll as well, because I think diagnostically we're going to have to understand that as a broader industry, or otherwise we're going to be faced with a broader discussion around inventory exhaustion and the quality of that inventory as it gets further developed.
Well, speaking of, we talked about this a little bit before we actually began the ProTech talk. What about simul-fracs? You see a growth in simul-frac applications for whatever reason, whatever advantage they may offer? Or do you think that that's probably going to keep it about the same level it has for some years now?
Well, simul-fracking, I'll tackle that one again as well. Simul-fracking doesn't feel like a new topic. It's, you know, something that's been around for for a long time. If you look at places like the Piceance Basin, they were known for split stream type applications years ago with quad, I think they called them quad setups, where they had little packs of wells and became really efficient at doing that operation. It worked well based upon the type of job and the size of job there, but it didn't always necessarily maybe fit the application of a Haynesville at the time, or, you know, an Eagle Ford or Bakken. So as I think about the Marcellus, have we done some simul-fracs? We have. We did some a few years ago, but it was more one-off, what I'd call more the exception than the rule. We had an opportunity to put a couple of crews in play and actually accelerate a schedule. But when you look in Appalachia, the roads, or West Virginia, Pennsylvania, I'll focus on them. The road systems there, you know, may not always be set up for a high volume of heavy duty traffic. And so the real question I would have is, you know, how sustainable is that from a planning perspective, day in and day out? And is there the ability to execute on that long term? Or is this going to be more one-off niche in nature for Appalachia? I think for us, we really like our efficiencies, and we feel like we've got a good systematic approach. It works well from a capital efficiency standpoint. You know, our numbers are really as good as we've ever harvested this past year. And so I think when you think about our peers, we feel like we're in a good place. Now, maybe that's a great fit for West Texas, where you can build a bigger location, cost implications are minimal. I'm not, you know, Dave could probably weigh in on that better than I can, but I think for Appalachia, it'll be interesting to see if this is something that has real legs and traction to it, or are we going to be back to a good methodical approach of zipper fracking wells, getting water and sand to location, and keeping a good, let's just say, heartbeat going on your operation.
Yeah, I'll follow on there. Thanks for the segue, Dennis. Yeah, you know, honestly, we implement simul-fracking pretty religiously now in West Texas. At least we do at Diamondback. The efficiency gains are astronomical in terms of the cost of completed lateral per foot. Because what's the biggest cost you have in a completion? It's time, right? So, you know, that pressure pumping crew being on surface, as that clock starts ticking away, you're paying the money. And for us, if we can become more and more efficient, more increasingly efficient in our operations, in our ability to extract these hydrocarbons, we're going to implement those technologies. And, you know, as Dennis stated, this isn't a new technology. This is just something that's been further refined. It's something that's been further adopted, if you will. And I think you're starting to see a growing majority of operators, especially here in the Permian, implementing that, as Dennis said, just due to the fact that space constraints really aren't an issue out here. So you can have larger pads, you can have these types of operations to gain those efficiencies.
How about it, Dave? Barnett, that's kind of where simul-fracs got their start.
Yeah,
I've heard about offsetting simul-fracs in the Barnett at 100 barrels per minute, and reports that some of the people on site saw the earth actually rising, but I don't know if that's true. Go ahead.
I don't think that was true. They were probably just thinking about that. But, you know, I think in the Barnett, we're pretty mature, and, you know, I don't really have that many wells where I have laterals right next to each other. You know, where we're going in and drilling is we'll be offsetting some other wells going different directions. If we are going the same way, you know, our fracs are a little bit further apart. And we're also looking at our technology of kind of the wine rack approach of, we drilled the original well here, so the next well is going to go up here offsetting it. So, you know, at this time, I don't know, there may be some folks that have some acreage where they're drilling right next to each other, but most of ours is not set up for that right now. We're just kind of going in and infilling on a couple different areas where simul-frac really isn't an issue.
Buddy, let's go ahead and do a poll question.
Yep, let's go to the next one.
Derek's got it coming.
It's coming. It's just taking us. There we go.
There we go. Where do you think we still have the most room for improvement or optimization? Drilling, well spacing, frac design, frac timing, order, So what do you think? All right. Next question. And I apologize if this seems somewhat self-serving, but I think there are others that are interested in this topic as well. What completion diagnostic needs might you propose in this era of energy transition? And it doesn't have to just be ones that we're associated with, just what completion diagnostic needs do you think you would like to see expanded upon?
While they're thinking, I'll just comment. Obviously, I'm prejudiced, but I do think the more we can do on a real-time basis, so we can make on-site changes to optimize, I think the industry as a whole would benefit from that.
And that's a good point. You know, we hear more about this. Do we make on-site changes or don't we? So, you know, address that a little bit too, as well as the diagnostic side. You know, is your company pro making changes real time or sticking with the designs? You know, we've got a lot of diagnostic data that's available now. So how do you approach the diagnostics from both perspectives there?
I think I'll go ahead and jump in on that one. You know, in terms of kind of historical reference for Diamondback, you know, we tend to try to not deviate as much from an engineered design, just because of the efficiencies that provides. One of the things that, you know, to make what I always say to the geologists here to help their engineering brethren, you know, is essentially an engineer is its most efficient when they're repeatable. And, you know, if we can provide that repeatability, if you will, within assessing and targeting the subsurface, then that's a better day for the company because that provides better return on investment. However, you know, we do notice things during the completion, you know, things that are obvious from pressure plots, that are obvious from very simple analysis of the data streams that come in, that we can shift on the fly, and we do. You know, and that's something that we try to do, but gross changes in the actual design in terms of cluster design and cluster spacing and stage spacing and sand loading and fluid loading, those things we tend not to do. It's more around alteration of rate, you know, the hammer, if you will, within a slick water design, that we can play with as we move from stage to stage, that I think can get to better access to the reservoir.
Anybody else? Okay.
You know, we find a lot of value here at TEP Barnett using tracers. We've had a pretty robust refrac program this past year. We utilized tracers in several of those wells. Mostly, I think they were proppant tracers, but we wanted to understand, you know, where our fracs were going and how to optimize from one well to the next. And so our team also wrote an SPE paper that's coming out this year on how we use mechanical specific energy from our drilling process combined with the tracers to help deliver some very good wells. And I think, in fact, I think one of the authors is from your company. So we like what you do, and I like real time. And I think Dave brings up some good points about, hey, you kind of have to know, kind of stick with what you're doing. But we're probably at the point where if we could do something real time, we would be willing to shift some things on the fly if we were confident in the technology. So, great point.
Okay. There's Well, let's do
Buddy,
the poll results first. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do the poll results first, Derek.
It's coming. Sorry, it's lagging a little bit today. I'm not sure why it's here coming your way.
Frac design, well spacing. That was a pretty close race on this one. All right. There's a question that's been brought up in the chat line here. I'll just, more of a comment, I guess. This individual says, I think there are two different definitions of simul-frac that are getting confused. One definition is fracking 2 wells at the same time with 1 crew. Another is fracking 2 wells that are next to each other downhole with 2 separate frac crews. The first definition leads to efficiency gains, and the second is more intended for increased downhole complexity. So that's kind of a good point. Any comment on that clarification?
Yeah, the simul-frac that I was referring to that we utilize is the single crew simul-frac, where essentially the same crew is pumping 2 wells at the same time and running wire line in the other 2 wells if it's a 4-well pad.
Okay, let's kind of move on to some more personal things. We like to touch on some personal issues, personal development issues as a part of these ProTechTalks. How do you envision these energy transitions might impact personnel, training requirements? Are you going to have to add staff? Are you going to be able to do things more robotically, autonomously? How do you, and if so, do you anticipate some new types of training that are going to be required going forward? So what do you see the future for personnel and personal development and training going forward with these transitions?
Well, buddy, I think we're gonna, I know I said this earlier about thinking outside the box, but we're gonna have to look at that from a personnel and training perspective as well. A few years ago, we were looking to take our next step in improving our processes around water recycling. And so we put together a water logistics room that could help manage trucking and where we're taking loads to and taking it maybe less, leaving it less to the discretion of, maybe that field trucking coordinator that's certainly got a lot of trucks to manage. Instead, looking at it from a little bit bigger picture, pulling in the production side, utilizing SCADA, and trying to harness some of that information and have a little bit more of a lasered enhanced output from it. One of the people that we hired actually was a prior air traffic controller from an airport. And so, this individual had never worked in oil and gas that I'm aware of, and really helped transform the way we looked at logistics management. And so, can we manage logistics? Sure, we do on a daily basis. And I think we could all point to individuals in our organizations that are, that have a strong skill set around that. But this individual brought in some tools and vision that helped us really put together that next chapter of water recycling and efficiency for us. So maybe a little different path than maybe what you were thinking when you asked the question, but I think we're going to absolutely have to think about what other, we talk about transferable skill sets, whether it's IT, HR, accounting, finance, but what other industries could have a transferable skill set into oil and gas that could change the way we look at wellbore manufacturing, being capital efficient, ESG, you name it. These are all hot topics for us, and there's not probably a winner or loser in that topic. They're all important. And so I don't know, I think the training will have to go in line with that, but it'll start with bringing in some of those skill sets.
At Total, one of the strengths of this company is its technology to be able to produce, drill offshore, in deep water offshore. And so one of the things that Total is going to be getting into is offshore wind energy. And I can tell you that at least over in Paris, there were a lot of folks worried about our company's new strategy of okay, goodness, what am I going to do now? And so one of the things internally here is that there'll be a lot of engineers that are going to be switching from the offshore oil and gas to offshore wind engines. Locally here in Fort Worth, we don't worry about deep water here in Fort Worth. We have drilled under a lake or two, but we do give our folks that are in-house here, a couple of the guys managed our solar projects, and they will be managing the other solar projects that we have coming in. We've got some lithium projects that we're looking at and locally, and also geothermal. So in our group, there'll be some folks that are going to be cross-trained doing some different things, and hopefully if we have success with some of those, we'll be able to hire some people from outside to do the same thing. So it's pretty exciting here at our shop.
Yeah, with this question is, again, another one of those loaded questions, because it kind of goes to something that I have a personal belief in, is that our industry historically and even currently, we've developed an industry, especially the operators, who have perfected execution. We have not perfected innovation. And, we tend to rely on outside sources for a lot of innovation. And, the first stop we typically go to is our service providers. But I think something that is tapped into by fewer than should be is academia. So essentially creating those partnerships with academic institutions where a lot of the innovation is being thought of on a daily basis. That's a key, I think, for our industry moving forward into this new world of energy transition. Giving them a platform to potentially test their ideas, be it access to facilities or be it access to monetary assistance through grants and scholarships and things of that nature. Those connections, I think, need to be utilized and leveraged moving into the future.
Well said. You anticipate all sorts of little devices flying overhead, watching, monitoring what's going on. About these little doggies, these little robotic dogs tromping around on offshore rigs to check processes and leakage and things like that. You see a lot of that going on. That's kind of promising to me.
We see a lot of that technology for sure. I was fortunate to go to the big consumer electronics show in Vegas with our company, and we sponsor quite a few of those type companies right now, and so they're out there. We've also are testing a couple of the drones for looking for methane and leaks in our systems on pad sites, and so that's definitely going to be part of the future, without a doubt.
It'll be interesting to see how that space further evolves. For us, right now, there's no substitute for an individual that can go out with a FLIR camera and do the inspection. We're encouraged by how that technology is developing, but for how it sits today, there's no substitute. And for us, part of it's things like winter prepared equipment. So we've got GPUs that basically have cabinet infrastructure around it. Difficult to look for those components and ensuring integrity in those when you have that kind of a let's just say production facility configuration. But that doesn't mean that when you look at the brain center that's on a producing site today, it is remarkable how different it is versus just 10 years ago or 15 years ago. We've got our whole field set up on SCADA. We've got gas control with folks monitoring the field 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's an environment that we're monitoring lots of things on the well site. I would equate it to when you first saw cars getting developed with the GPS in them. And now you look at it, they call it an infotainment system. I mean, it's completely different. And that's the way our producing sites are. At first it was, how do you move to something where I can monitor flow rate and pressure? And now, you have the ability to put in sensing devices that basically from an LEL perspective could shut down a well site. So it's ever evolving. I think we'll get there. I have all the confidence in the world, but from where we're at today, certainly no substitute for, the team members we have with a FLIR camera doing those on-site inspections.
Hey, buddy, I think we got time for one more
poll question. Let's do it.
One more poll question, and then we probably have one more question to use up our time spot. So.
Yep.
There you go.
What is the most important parameter to consider when switching from a primarily liquids to a gas reservoir? All right, here's your good reservoir question. So lateral length, well spacing, frac size, artificial lift, fracturing fluids, geosteering. In other words, if you go to primarily oil to gas production, can you lengthen the laterals? What you're thinking along these lines, the most important parameter. Okay. Yeah, on that last question, wouldn't it be fascinating if a landowner wandered onto location one day and he looks out on the location with all this frac equipment. He doesn't see any fumes, doesn't hear much noise because everything's electrified, and hardly sees any people at all. Must be a culture shock to wonder what in the world is going on here. Okay, enough of that. One more sort of question that's obviously of interest to us at ProTechnics and Core Lab, and we'll touch on this just briefly. What can, and not just ProTechnics, but what can the diagnostic community and ProTechnics and Core Lab, the broader Core Lab, do to assist your organization in addressing some of these challenges? How can we help? Again, we're talking about the ProTechnics, the diagnostics, Core Lab, the fluids, the cores, the regional studies. What jumps off the page at you is, man, if only they would do this. Stand by, Dick.
From our perspective, you guys are doing a good job, and at TEP Barnett, our margins are very tight here in the Barnett, and so basically optimizing our refracts and our new completions is what we need help with, and what you currently do. The real time that you talked about, that would be interesting. Be interested in seeing where that is, but we've got to be able to make better wells for the money we're investing.
I think one thing that I could probably hope and wish for would likely be more, I guess, on the Core Lab side. Obviously, geologist here, I have to think about rocks. Is the fact that, one of the biggest unknowns we really have is the amount of formation damage we impart over time through pressure drawdown, through fracturing fluids, essentially stewing on the formation face for some period of time. We have orphaned water that we pumped underground all over the place. We've done multiple assessments where we've identified essentially the connate water coming into the wellbore very quickly from during our load recovery. So we know that we're orphaning water into these formations for some period of time. And then we continue to infill develop those reservoirs, and we might be encountering some of that orphaned water that's been essentially stewing and sitting on that formation face for some period of time under some temperature and pressure condition. So what's the impact of that? Does that have an impact on the parent-child relationship, or is it purely just depletion and the geomechanical response to depletion? So I think more longer-term studies to that respect on understanding what we do, how we alter the reservoir instead of just understanding what the reservoir is. I think is something that we really need as an industry to move forward and be more efficient.
Good point.
Yeah, buddy, I think my perspective would be is we just have a sea of data that's out there when you look at work that you guys have done, all of us as operators. And, I think the challenge we have to embrace both range and really other operators and folks like yourself that we partner with at times is, are we getting everything we can out of the data that we have? We have around over 1,000 wells that are producing in Appalachia, probably closer to 1,100. And, every year we're pumping somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 or 5,000 frac jobs. You do that 10 years, and it starts to turn into a lot of frac jobs, a lot of observations. And I think we've gleaned as an industry a ton out of this information, but we also are on to the next job. We're on to the next well, and we're on to the next execution, to maybe something Dave Cannon shared. We're trying to be efficient. We're trying to be repeatable, and we're maximizing, I think, a lot out of that data. But deep down inside, I just keep telling myself there's more to give. There's more to learn, and there's more for us to extract out of the data that we have, whether it's those historical tracing projects we've done together, microseismic, you name it. I mean, all of that ties in our core data. It all ties back to how do we best land the well? How do we best complete it? How do we best space them? The questions that you guys are posing.
Right.
Hey, buddy, I'll comment. I think those are very useful for us. Those are things that we, one of our challenges and is how best to help answer the questions. Specific, Dennis, your comment about the data. We're spending a significant amount of our time trying to figure out how we can not only provide that to the various operators in a form that can help them, but leverage all the experience we've got. We've traced, you throw out those numbers of stages. Well, we've probably traced, I think, the numbers in the 50,000 well, right? And so trying to manage that and make sure we're maximizing what diagnostic dollars you guys are willing to spend. And touching a little bit on what Dave Leopold said is, we realize that the margins are tight right now. We're looking for ways to provide cost-effective diagnostics, answer things maybe in a little different technique than we might have when we had $100 oil. But I think the key is, and I think, we saw the poll question where, a large percentage feel there's still some advancements to be made on the diagnostic side. I think a lot of it has to do with data analytics. But a lot of it is just, how do we continue to optimize when we know that most of that is a dollar that's coming off of the bottom line, and it's a really tough balance. It's a balance for the operators, and it's a balance for us to kind of figure out where to go. And if I get anything out to the people that are on this call and everyone here is, we are open to any suggestions. If there's a direction we need to head, I don't think we've done as good a job over the last 10 years of asking which direction we need to go. So we'd love to partner with you. And if you've got something you want to talk to us about and hey, could we try doing something like this? Maybe it's just doing something different with our existing data, or maybe it's doing something completely different. So just wanted to throw that out. I guess we still got the last poll results. Should be.
Yep, let's take a look. Artificial lift. Well, that's a little bit of a surprise to me. Huh. I was leaning towards well spacing, but artificial lift. Yeah, that's a good point. It's artificial lift is going to be a little more difficult as the laterals get longer in these oil wells. Good point. Okay, let's close with some quick personal questions. As an admired executive in our industry, I'm going to ask you to share with us, each one of you. Tell us who is the most inspirational leader in your career and why. You don't have to elaborate on it. Don't have a whole lot of time left, but just a few points as to why that person stood out as an inspirational motivator in your career development.
I guess I'll go first. I'm a fan of history, a history buff, if you will. I think my most inspirational leadership mentor, if you will, didn't even know him, was Winston Churchill. His perseverance and dedication to policy and belief in freedom, but also his tenacity and courage in the face of just imminent peril. I think those kind of leadership traits can be transitioned to decision-making processes we make every day. Have courage in your decisions. But also he was a superb communicator. He was able to reach all walks of life, with his words and his innate ability to connect with all. And that is the key to translating your courage in decision-making to your team, is that transparency and that communication. And I think he's an excellent example of both.
Good one. Who else? Who's next? All right, Dave.
I've had the opportunity to work for some quality CEOs, and I thought about it a little bit differently. I was thinking about it, an inspirational leader in our industry. So that was interesting, Dave Cannon. The two that stuck out to me were Jim Hackett and Aubrey McClendon, and I'll pick on Aubrey because I had more face time with him, and I can say that he was one of a kind. He brought energy every day to the office, treated his employees with kindness and respect. And, I used to give Aubrey a tour of the Barnett each year before the Texas OU Red Rivalry game. And, Aubrey had an unmatched passion to understand the business and reward those around him. And I know that he always met with each new employee, at the start of their career. And we would be in a room, and Aubrey would ask questions and allow you to ask a question. But, if you were in there, you'd always want to make sure that you were able to answer his question, because you wanted to look good for your new CEO. And I remember when it was my turn to get in there, I was prepared for him. I'm like, okay, I know everything that I need to know. And, he asked me, how thick is the cement at DFW Airport? Our runways. And, caught me completely off guard, had no idea. But, the reason why I asked that is I was the DFW operations manager. So for all the wells you see at DFW Airport, my group drilled and completed those. And so I will tell you that the answer was 36 inches that I found out after I made a quick text to my DFW counterpart at DFW Airport, and Aubrey replied right away saying, "Okay, great news." But he just always had a passion, asked more questions on those trips, and wanted to know details about everything. And I admired the heck out of him. He's a really good man.
Cool. Dennis?
Yeah, I got a similar story, I think, as Dave Leopold, but it's a name that I know, Dick, and a few others, but it'd be John Applegath. John worked at Range for a number of years. He was at UPR, Champlin. I'm probably forgetting some stops along the way, but I didn't get a chance to work with John until I moved to Pittsburgh in 2010. And quickly, as those of you who've worked around him, gained a lot of respect for him pretty quickly. He's one of those rare individuals that, he knows a lot about the industry in multiple aspects. He's just not a drilling, expert. He knows marketing, he knows land, he knows, completions. He knows a lot of the different aspects of our business. And, John had this unique way of kind of challenging you at times with this big booming voice that he has, I used to tell him, I said, you know, John, the reason why our relationship works is because you kind of remind me of my father. He either was going to hug me or put my rear end between my shoulder blades, but there was no in between. And John kind of chuckled, but then kind of stared at me like he kind of got it, but you know, it was kind of a funny moment. But you know, John had a big heart, has a big heart. You know, he was very instrumental in us kicking off things that we do now today that if you look back, his fingerprints were all over it, and starting like our FLIR inspections that we started in the beginning, you know, getting some of our drilling practices the way they are, you know, dual fuel rigs, he played a role in. But, you know, my one encounter with John, and I probably never forget, is we had a casing leak in completing a lateral, and we went to him with a completion, or I went to him with a completion repair approach. And he asked me, why not set a casing patch in the well? And I said, well, John, we're concerned about getting stuck in setting a casing patch in a lateral. And we went through all the reasons why it wouldn't work. And he looked at me, he said, well, I know that it's possible and I know people have done it. I need you to go back to the drawing board and do a little more homework. And when I left his office, I felt like I had, you know, taken 20 bucks out of his wallet. I mean, I was pretty disappointed and somewhat embarrassed, and he could have, you know, taken a much sterner approach, but instead I never forgot that, and always reminded myself when I go to see John or other managers, have I done all the homework that I needed to have this conversation I'm about to have. And so John left a pretty big lasting impression on me, and good man. So appreciate the time that he spent mentoring me.
And I'll end with a real quick one, buddy. And I would agree, several of our managers at Union Pacific, it was a very, it was a unique company, and a lot of my friends are still in the business and in key roles, Dave Leopold being one of them, and others we've had in previous ProTech talks. I guess I would take just a little bit different spin. And I guess one of my biggest inspiration would be just some of the early oil and gas pioneers, the ones that really got this industry going. I think it's pretty remarkable. And you look at its resilience and how far we've come. And then you throw in through the years, the continued innovation. I'm absolutely amazed by what drilling and completion efficiencies we've accomplished in the last 10 years. I think the three other panelists on here have a lot to do with that. I would have never thought we could have drilled a 3-mile lateral in any time period, let alone in what it was taking us to drill 1,000 feet 10 years ago. So absolutely mind-boggling, the amount of innovation and stuff. So that would be my answer. And I'll just end my part by saying we really appreciate all of you participating in the panel, and everybody out there that took an hour and a half of your day to listen in. We're always open for comments and feedback, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, buddy, to end it.
Yeah, one more real quick point here that we also like to include. Can you offer up one nugget of wisdom for young industry professionals, you know, getting started in their career? You know, what piece of advice would you offer them?
I think what I always tell folks are new hires that come into the organization, regardless of what discipline, is know enough about everything to get yourself in trouble. You know, to make it maybe a little bit better piece of advice. Really, I'll come back off of that and I'll say, no, actually, you know enough about everything within our industry so you can ask the right questions. You know, because that's really what you need to have. You need to have that breadth of knowledge to be able to understand if something is right or wrong, and be brave enough to ask the question. So that's what I always try to impart to the new hires.
Good advice. Dave? Yes.
I'll say, you know, demand excellence from yourself. I'll just say you want to be the one when you walk out of a meeting room that people remember regarding your effort, your preparedness, your energy, and your potential.
Dennis?
You stole mine, Dave.
All right, come up with another one. Dennis, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say, there's a ton of value in the relationships that you build in this industry. And, whether it's the relationships with, the Dick Leonards of the world or hopefully now after meeting Dave Cannon today, the relationship that could maybe ensue between the two of us. And when I think back on, some of my hardest, challenging moments, in the industry, I always had someone that I knew that I could pick up the phone and call them. And it might be 10 o'clock at night and they'd say, here's what you need to run to get that fish out of the hole. Or here's what I would think about before I would even rig up on the well. Or, hey, have you peer reviewed this against another team? Or, this is such a family industry that if you're not developing relationships, you're really missing an opportunity. And so I think the work ethic and all of that, we can all, it goes without saying, there's an opportunity there with the discipline and learn a lot. But boy, if you'll develop relationships along the way, I think you're going to be smarter, stronger, more effective for your organization, and you're going to have a long, successful career.
Great. All right, Dick, you come up with an alternative?
Yeah, well, and when Dennis brought up John Applegath, it was something that he had always told me, and really it's 2 points, but it's never give up and fail forward faster. So that's mine.
Great. All right, here's the results of the alma maters here. I guess the easiest one probably is our TSIP representative is Mr. Dick Leonard. There we go. Okay, all right, get your symbol up there. Mr. Dave Cannon, he's the one that attended that university that has the mysterious feline mascot that dwells in a cave in Mount Nittany overlooking Penn State University. Supposed to strike fear in the hearts of the incoming athletic teams.
Didn't this year.
Do what?
It didn't this year.
Didn't this year much, did it? And Mr. Leopold attended a university in Colorado that has often been referred to as Coors U. So I'm sure that probably didn't have anything to do with your time there. But I know some people spent a fair amount of time down the road at the Coors Brewery from the School of Mines in Denver, just outside of Denver. And finally, Mr. Degner, in the true classical Greek era of debating key academic issues of the day, a lot of that took place in the Dixie Chicken in College Station, Texas, because he's an Aggie. Okay, folks, thanks for joining us. Hopefully it was a learning experience for you. Hopefully we picked up some tidbits that'll help us in our career development. And we appreciate you joining us and look forward to the next ProTech Talk. So everybody have a safe, pleasant, and successful rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll get a high five in here.
Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you, buddy.
Take care.
Here.